Oh, welcome to Bible Survey. Just want to take about half an hour or so and walk through the syllabus for the course so that we can save time in class on Monday and jump right in, particularly due to the fact that we may have some inclement weather here in the first week or so of class and might miss some time. So, don't want to spend time walking through the syllabus. Encourage you to open your copy of the syllabus that's on the Foxtail site for the course. You can see most all of this information there, but I'm also going to walk through some of the details of how the class is going to work, what we're trying to do in the course. We'll make a few introductory comments on Monday and then just kind of jump into material. So, you're in Bible Survey, which is part of your Gen Ed curriculum. So, before we even begin, I want to stress one thing. So, some of you are coming to this class, some are coming with quite a bit of biblical experience. You've maybe grown up going to church, perhaps were very involved in Sunday school, things like that at church. Maybe you have read quite a bit of the Bible, comfortable with the biblical text. That's awesome. I think you're still going to find this to be an enjoyable class and discover that there's things maybe about context and history of some of the texts that are in the Bible that may be surprising even for you. But a number of you, I would venture to guess quite a few of you, probably have quite a bit of anxiety about this course. You don't come from maybe highly church backgrounds. You have not read the Bible much, if at all. You're not very familiar with it. I just want to stress that is not an issue. Right? I do not need to be anxious about that. We're going to move through the text in such a way and explain things, comments as we go, that my course would suggest that students who are completely unfamiliar with the Bible do just fine in this class, and that is not something to be anxious about, and in fact, won't be any kind of issue at all, and that you'll find that if you'll just kind of do the work and stay on top of things and ask questions when you have them, that you're going to be just fine. So kind of right out of the gate, want to just alleviate maybe anxieties or concerns you have regarding that. Also want to stress, this is a Bible course taught from a Christian perspective, but you do not have to be a Christian yourself to do well in this class, right? You're going to read quite a bit of the Bible. You're going to answer questions about, specific questions about what is in the text, and some more kind of general philosophical questions about what does the text mean for Christians and for Jews who read it. But at no point are you going to be required. The only way to get an A in this course is to say that I am an evangelical Christian. That is not the case at all, right? You just need to do the work, and encourage you to just feel free to be honest and open about where you're coming from in terms of very actively involved in Christian faith, nominally or minimally involved with Christianity, or not at all. And that is fine too. And there really isn't any any kind of sense that only these sorts of students can thrive in this class. I think anyone can do well here and is welcome here. And I think you're going to feel that as we get going. But I'm sure some of you maybe are anxious about that before we even begin, but just want to put your minds at ease. So, a few of the things that this course is trying to do, some of the course objectives. I want you to come away with at the end of the semester with kind of a broad sense of the narrative of Scripture, just from a historical standpoint. What happens? How does it move through time? Who are some of the key people involved in that story? How does it fit together? So the general narrative arc of Scripture, we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at. There'll be some assignments that, particularly on the 3 exams, that will kind of link that all together for you. Want you to be able to kind of related to that, identify sort of the significant individuals. There's a number of people or families, groups that really impact kind of the formation of the biblical story. You're going to learn and be familiar with some of those. But we're not just going to talk about history. We're not just going to talk about names, and very little are we going to talk about dates. quite a bit of what we're going to do is talk about themes. Like, what is the Bible trying to say? What are some of the theological ideas being expressed in Scripture in the Bible? And so we'll look at those. We're going to touch on scholarly issues related to interacting with the Bible. That this is sometimes called biblical criticism, which is not to imply that anyone that does this kind of work is criticizing the Bible, but just in-depth study. Literary criticism is kind of detailed, pulling apart or studying a text. And so literary criticism that is applied to the Bible is biblical criticism. So we're going to look at some issues related to that. What do we know and what do we think about who wrote various parts of the Bible? How old are they? What happens when you have two or three stories that are kind of retellings of the same events, but are not exactly identical? How do we think about that? So, we're going to become kind of generally aware of some of the issues that are involved in biblical studies, but people spend their lives doing this work. People get PhDs and spend hours and hours and write thousands of pages of detailed burrowing down into some of these issues. We're going to kind of touch on them. I want you to be generally familiar with some of the issues involved with biblical studies, biblical criticism, but we're not going to go deeply in depth with those. But hopefully at the end of this class, if you were at a social event or somewhere and somebody goes, oh, Moses never existed, you would be able to play, well, here's what we do or don't know about that. Here's how scholars think or don't think about that kind of question. At least have some general idea rather than that just being a question or a statement that would come out of the blue completely. So we're going to spend some time looking at that kind of thing. And hopefully, and this is kind of the last course objective, and it's kind of an informal one. So this is an academic class, right? This isn't youth group. It's not church Sunday school. The expressed goals of the class are academic in nature. You're going to take exams. You're going to write some papers. But I hope, and my experience has been, I have taught this course, I think, over 40 times in the last 16 years here at Fox. My hope is that you are going to come away impacted personally by this experience, that interacting with the Bible as closely and as consistently and constantly as we're going to for the next 15 weeks, that is going to shape who you are, shape your faith, shape your understanding of God, and maybe your relationship with God, your relationship with the Bible. You're not going to be tested on that. There will never be a question asking you, how have you been changed by this experience? But past experiences and comments that I've gotten in emails from students at the end of the semester or course eval comments suggest that for many students, this is a pretty powerful experience as well. So I hope you'll have, at least some of you will have experiences like that. And we'll just see as we go. So there are three primary texts for the course. The first is just a modern English translation of the Bible. So in the syllabus, I list a very specific version of what's called the New International Version of the Bible. The NIV, or New International Version, that's what I'll be reading in class, and that's what I'll be talking from, lecturing from during class. You don't have to read along with that. The Bible that I list on the syllabus is the cheapest version of the NIV that I've been able to find on the internet. It's just like $5 or $6. It's a paperback version. So if you do not have a Bible, or the only Bible you have is kind of in King James English or something like that, I encourage you to get that one, and it's nice and cheap. But if you have a modern English translation that you already use, that you maybe came to Fox with or have grown up with in your family or your church, you're welcome to use that, right? So I just ask that it not be a paraphrase. So there's kind of a popular text called The Message, which is one person who did a paraphrasing, kind of paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter of the ideas of the Bible. It's a great paraphrase by Eugene Peterson, but it's not detailed enough for this course. Also, I would ask you not to use like the King James Version or versions of the Bible that are so antiquated in its language that it's increasingly hard for us to understand because it's using English as it was spoken and written 400, 500 years ago. So any kind of 20th century or later uh, English translation is fine. So if you've got that, you're set. The two other courts texts that you're going to need, one is The Blue Parakeet by Scott McKnight. The second is Santa Biblia by Justo Gonzalez. And those are two biblical scholars. Scott McKnight is in Chicago. Justo Gonzalez is primarily a church historian. He's written church history books that are very, very popular and used in colleges and seminaries and grad schools all around the world. But he's also written a book about kind of reading the Bible from a Hispanic perspective. McKnight is a New Testament scholar, one of the leading American biblical scholars. And so they both wrote books not for the academy, not for graduate students, but for just Christians in everyday life, and try to talk in those books about how do we read the Bible? What's going on? How do we interpret it? How do we um, how do we read a 2,000, 3,000 year old text and have it make sense to us? So we're not going to read all of either of those, but I am going to assign significant portions of both of those books, and then you're going to do some writing on those two texts. So those two will come down the line later in the semester. This very first week, you will have Bible reading, and you will have weekly Bible reading that you're responsible for. And we're going to turn to that now as we talk about how the grading for the course will work. So there's basically five or three components broken into about 6 different units, okay, that comprise your grade for the course. So the first thing that you're graded on is weekly Bible reading. Okay, so every single week of the semester, all 15 weeks, you will be assigned, and it's listed on Foxtail for each week, what the text for that week is, specific chapters of the Bible that you need to read. Okay, so if you're very unfamiliar with the Bible's kind of broken down into books. The first book is Genesis, followed by Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Books of the Bible, and then each book is divided into chapters. And some of these chapters are very short. Sometimes they're just 4 or 5 paragraphs. Sometimes they're a page or two long. So they're not chapters like a typical book that might be 20 or 30 pages. They're broken down into chapters. So you'll often see Genesis 2. That's Genesis chapter 2, and then a colon, and then a second number, like Genesis 2:12. And that last number is the specific verse, which is usually like a sentence or two long. So sometimes in class, like if I say, okay, we're looking at Leviticus 5, verse 17, you would find the book of Leviticus, you would find the chapter 5, and then there'd be a smaller number through the few paragraphs that make up that chapter that tell you which verse we're in. Okay, so but typically you'll have some weeks that'll be very small. The first week is probably the shortest. You just have 4 chapters of Genesis to read. Some weeks it's 30 or 40 chapters, but usually somewhere in between. But you'll have weekly Bible reading, and how I want you to display for me that you've done it is you're going to submit on Foxtail every Monday notes for that weekly Bible reading. Okay, so I call those reading summaries, and they look a little bit like this. So this is a sample of a student I had a couple years ago. Her summary statements from the second reading. So this is a long one. She had to read Genesis 12 through 45. You can kind of see there. It's just sort of bullet points. Chapter 12. Bam, 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 bam. She just has 4 summary statements. They don't have to be complete sentences. They shouldn't be longer than one sentence. I'm not asking you to summarize, to put into your own words what the Bible text says. I'm not asking you to comment about what it means. I'm just asking you to show me that your eyes read the page, right? So, it could be a bullet point in 3 or 4 words if they're significant enough that me and my TA can tell you read it, or like one sentence would do the trick. Depending on how long that week's reading is, sometimes those are like a page and a half of single-spaced bullet point notes. Sometimes they might go up to 3 or 4 pages if there's a lot of reading. But if you find yourself going longer than that, you're doing too much. And the first week or two, my TA and I will give you feedback. Like if you're not doing enough, we'll ask you to provide more detail. Or if you're providing significantly more than you need, we'll invite you to dial it back some. Again, this is going to it's a somewhat monotonous assignment. By the end of the semester, you will be glad to be finished with your typing up the notes. But I used to give quizzes. I used to give a quiz on the reading every Friday. And what I discovered was that students that had grown up in the church could fake it. Often didn't do the reading, but just knew enough generally about whatever part of the Bible we were in that they could still get a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. And that sometimes students who didn't grow up with Bible backgrounds would read like crazy, kind of study for these Friday quizzes and still do poorly just because they lack the familiarity. So this is a way, like I really moved to this format to help those of you that don't have any Bible background, right? So I'm not asking you to interpret or fill in the gaps about what you've read. Just do enough notes that I can tell that you did read it. And there's 15 of them. It's 20% of your grade, so it counts as a full exam. So it is free points, right? If you will stay on top of this and do them on time every week, submitting them Monday of each week, you get 100 on an exam. But each week that you don't submit one, you functionally lose almost a point from your grade, right? So if you stay on top of it, it's easy points that can really help your grade. If you fall behind or don't do them at all, and every semester I have students that don't. Last fall, I had a student who got an A on every single test, got a C for the class because they did not do one reading summary the entire semester. And so they lost 20% of their grade, and they went from like a 93 to a 73 just because of that. So it's redundant, it gets repetitive, but stay on top of it, and it's free points to help you. The second piece of grading, we will have 3 exams through the semester, about 5 weeks in, 10 weeks in, and the final exam. Those will cover, the first 2 will just cover the material up through week 5 will be the first exam. The material from 5 to 10 will be the second exam. The final exam will be mostly the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks of the semester, but also a handful of cumulative questions. So we will bring a few questions from the first 2 tests back onto the final, and it'll be a slightly longer exam. But those are matching or multiple choice, so they're not complicated. Again, if you I will also provide study guides as we come up to each exam, and even some review in class. So if you will kind of stay on top of that study guide, stay on top of that review session, you are set up to do well. Okay, my goal in this class is that everyone in here will get a B or better. That never happens. There's always a handful of students that, for whatever reason, get C's or lower. But the vast majority of you will get a B or better. And I want you to. I don't want anyone to fail Introduction to Bible at George Fox. Like, I think that's a class that I want you to succeed in and have a positive experience with. Okay, so that's the second piece. So we've got reading summaries every week, 3 exams. So that's, we're up to 80% of your grade. 10 You'll have 2 assignments that are going to be 10% of your grade each, and that's back to the text. So what you will do with each of those, I'm going to assign, again, about half of each book, specific chapters for you to read. You're going to do notes, like you do on your weekly summaries, notes for the assigned chapters, which you'll submit on Foxtail. And then I will also give you prompts. I'll give you about 4 or 5 questions related to the specific chapters I've assigned, and I want you to write kind of like a half a page for each question, right? So for Santa Biblia, there'll be 4 or 5 prompts, and I want you to kind of write. This isn't a highly formalized essay. You're not trying to tie the whole thing together. Here's my theme, my thesis statement. Here's my conclusion. But you do need to write coherent paragraphs, right? So here's prompt 1. Write a paragraph or 2 about it. Prompt 2. Write another couple paragraphs about that, and then you move through it and submit it. It's single-spaced. it needs to be coherent, but I'm not going to be overly concerned about grammar or formatting style, that kind of thing. And that's pretty much the grading setup for the class, right? Those are 10% each. And so, 20% for weekly reading summaries, 20% for each exam is 60% of the course, so that we're now at 80. And then 10% for each of those book assignments brings us to 100%. There are some opportunities for extra credit, most of which are listed already on Foxtail, or kind of shown the things that you could read. So if you fall behind, you do really poorly on one or more of the exams, or you've missed a bunch of assignments and you're worried about catching up. If you'll look on the Foxtail site, you'll see at the very top of the page are about 7 or 8 PDFs. And those are chapters or articles from books that I have or journals that I've read that are related to topics that we'll discuss in class. There's a couple right away about what's going on in Genesis 1 and 2. There's an article about the book of Joshua and the conquering of the promised land. And does God ask the Israelites to commit genocide, basically, by destroying all the people in the land that they're entering? So you'll have the option if you're interested. You don't have to do any of those, but if you feel like you need some extra credit, you can choose any of those PDFs, read them. You'll sort of like the book assignment. You'll write bullet point notes about what the article was saying, and then you'll write a paragraph or two about your thoughts about it. How did you agree with the argument? Was it helpful for you? Did it clarify questions? Did it cause new questions for you? Also, an option that I'm going to give you for extra credit that's not posted on Foxtail. In the past, this course has used a second textbook, this book called Context and Community, the Bible, Context and Community, that was written by myself and Dr. Brian Doak, who teaches here at Fox. And we use that as a textbook for this class. It has 45 chapters kind of lining up with the 45 class sessions each for Bible survey. It was written specifically for this course. But when you assign that, all the Bible reading, and 2 extra texts, students used to read quite a bit in Bible survey. So as the school is moving more towards Theo 101, Theo 102, which has almost no reading, in all honesty, my sense is I want to dial back the amount of reading assigned for Bible survey so that it is more similar to what's going on in Theo. You are still going to read more for this course than students that are in Theo will. But you will read less than past students in Bible survey. So what you can do, there are still lots of copies of that textbook around campus. I'm putting 4 or 5 copies of it on reserve in the library. So again, if you find yourself behind or need some extra credit, you can go to the library, check out that, and read, 1 or 2 chapters, do the same kind of thing, write detailed notes about them and some responses. These extra credits are not huge. To do each one is to give yourself 2 points more on a test, 3 points more on a test. So this isn't I'll just bomb all the tests, but I'll be fine. I'll just do all the extra credit options and pull my grade up a ton. I will put limits, on how, to me, extra credit is to help students that are perhaps failing or in danger of failing the course. And maybe students that are on the edge, I've got a C plus, I'd like to get a B. I've got a B plus, I'd like to get an A minus. Okay, do a little extra credit for that. I'm not that interested in having, students I'm going to try to get 20% of my grade done with extra credit, and I'm just going to over spring break just do tons and tons of stuff and pull my grade up by 16 points. That to me is kind of an abuse of that system. So we'll talk and go on a case-by-case basis, but that is there. There are ways to get extra credit if you find yourself falling behind. I want to talk a little bit about attendance. The tests will be 100% based on class lecture. Right, so coming to class is tremendously important, right? You need to be there. The class meets 3 times a week. You're expected to be there, to be on time, to stay awake, and participate in class. So I will give you 3 kind of unexcused absences, right? You get sick, you need to go to the airport to pick up a friend, something comes up, or you just really want a day off. You get 3 of those, and you don't have to email me to tell me that you have the flu. You don't have to email me to explain, you're running this errand for your family. As long as you're in those first 3, just do it, and it's totally fine. After 3, it will begin to affect your grade, right? So if you miss 7, 8, 9 classes, you're going to have a hard time on the exams because you're missing a ton of material. I will not provide you with notes for classes that you miss. If you miss a class, what you need to do is find somebody in class who's willing to share their notes with you. But and partly I have notes for each lecture, but they're in kind of a scattered, sort of fragmentary format that really wouldn't be that helpful for you. And I don't feel it's my responsibility to type up a lecture summary for students that miss class. So that's kind of on you, right? Like if you miss that, there's no penalty. You don't have to, this isn't high school where the school's going to notify your parents. You just miss class. But if you miss more than 3, it will start to hurt your grade, and that'll be a bit of a ding to the grade. And so that will come along. So you need to be here. That's important. I really, really do not want you to use technology in class, if at all possible. Okay, so there may be a handful of you who have specific reasons why you need to use your computer to take notes, perhaps some kind of disability, something that's approved through the DSO. And if that's the case, if the Disability Service Office, just talk with me about that, right? And we could set up something where, yes, you can use your computer. Otherwise, I would really like you to just take hand notes in a notebook, writing by hand, for a couple reasons. One, I think studies suggest that we learn better when we're more actively involved in note taking. And that, yes, you type into a computer, but there's something about writing by hand that seems to engage our brains in a ways that you learn better. But the primary reason is that Hoover 105 has Wi-Fi, right? And I know if I'm in a meeting and I'm taking notes on my computer and the internet is there, no matter who I'm meeting with, there's a very good chance at some point I'm just going to go check email for a second, or I'm just going to see what's going on ESPN's website, or just check Twitter for a quick moment. It's just really hard to stay off the internet if it's available to us. So I have found the easiest way to kind of have everyone's attention and engagement is to just say we're not using laptops for note taking. We're not using cell phones. I don't want to see you on your phone. It's a theater class, the way Hoover 105 is set up. So I can't see, like there's not a table and underneath, but it's fairly obvious from the front when somebody is on a device. And just, yeah, it's pretty noticeable. It's often noticeable to the people around you if you're on a device. So please just don't have them on. Like I said, we will start class on time. We'll end on time. I will not hold you over, but I do expect to be able to jump in as soon as we're there. So you're coming to class on time and promptly is going to be imperative. I am coming from this semester. I have a 1 o'clock class in another building. So I will be arriving kind of within a minute or two, a couple minutes of the start of class each time. So I won't have much time for engaging questions. You may have questions about assignments or attendance or things like that. I won't be able to deal with that before class as a general rule. I won't be there early enough. But I'm happy to talk with you after class. I'm also happy to set up appointments to talk with you. So sometimes students have questions about my office hours. I am here quite a bit. I come in most mornings at 8:30, stay till about 3 or 4 every afternoon. But what I would encourage you to do is just email me, because sometimes I'm meeting students for coffee or colleagues for a meeting. So it's hard to kind of predict I will always be in my office at these set hours. So if you're interested in meeting with me, just talk to me after class or send me an email, and we'll set something up. I'm very happy to meet with students for specific course-related things or just general questions you may have about things we're discussing in class, anything you want. But just email me and we'll set something up in that regard. So a couple other comments just about how I want you to engage with class. Um, this is a lecture. It's the only class I teach that has, we have a set amount of material we have to cover, right? Every other class, well, if we didn't get to it, they don't know. Like, we just didn't get to it. This class starts at the beginning of the Bible, ends at the end of the Bible. And somehow by the end of April, we have to have reached the book of Revelation, right? So there is a little bit of pressure to keep moving. um, you'll find, or I have found often, every once in a while, you get some question or comment that comes up during class that, gosh, it would really be fun and interesting. Let's just take the next half hour. Let's take all afternoon and just talk about that issue. And people have thoughts, and we could kick stuff around. We will do as much of that as I think we can. But there will definitely be times where I will cut off those kind of discussions to say, okay, we have to go back and we have to keep moving, right? Because having taught this a number of times, like, I have a sense of, okay, by week 5, we need to kind of be here in the Bible. By week 8, we need to be there. By week 10, this place. So we will be moving along. But I do want to encourage you to ask questions. The class size is going to be such that we can't hear from everyone every class period. But it's also not so large that most of you can ask questions. Like, in a given week or a week or two, almost any of you can make a comment or ask a questions. I will ask for questions. I will ask questions of you and would love to have your response. So to participate in class does not mean that you have to talk actively all the time. In fact, there might be one or two of you, sometimes that I might ask to dial back. Like, if it starts to seem like, gosh, you're just really engaged, you really like to talk about this stuff, and it's kind of slowing down the movement of the course, I might contact you outside of class and ask you to kind of, hey, can we talk, maybe get together for coffee or something. But some of you are going to be pretty quiet, and that's fine, right? You can display to me that you are engaged with class through active note taking, through making good eye contact, through nodding your head at appropriate moments. Like, you don't have to raise your hand and talk to display that you care about the material or that you're engaged with it. But I do expect you to be actively listening, actively taking notes. Again, all of the tests, every single question is based on stuff from lecture. So if you just kind of come, passively sit, cross your arms, don't ever get out a notebook and sort of, stare into space, that's really going to hurt you in the long run. So I ask you to be engaged. And then kind of the final thing on participation, and what we're about to wrap up this video is, we're not all coming from the same backgrounds, right? Like, some of us, as we said earlier, are very churched, have a lot of familiarity with stuff. Some of us have no familiarity with stuff. Some of us think the Bible's crazy. It's just fairy tales written by people long ago. And why in the world would you believe in some cosmic Santa Claus sitting up in the sky? That's totally fine. Like, all of our different backgrounds, they are what they are. That's what we bring to class. What I do really ask is that we be respectful of one another, right? So if somebody in class makes a comment that is clearly not from your background, it's totally fine to disagree. It's totally fine to offer an alternative option, to say, well, actually, I think maybe this is what's going on. That's completely fine. What is not fine is kind of calling somebody stupid for their opinion, or saying, like, how could anybody think that? Or, no Christians think this sort of thing. Well, we're going to find Christians and Jews have thought a lot of different things about the Bible. And there's a whole lot of stuff that over 2,000 years, people have not necessarily agreed on all the time. So it's totally fine. And in fact, I encourage you to feel like you can offer alternative or opposing positions to what I say or what other folks say. But there are definitely ways to do that demonstrate respect and politeness and kind of a culture of civility in the classroom. And I expect and will demand that be the case, right? Like, if you make comments in class that are insulting to others, insulting to me, insulting to the text itself, like, I will call you out on that, either in class or in your grade. That also goes with your written work, right? It's totally fine to say, hey, I am not a Christian, and so I'm not sure I believe that this stuff happened. That's one thing, right? Like, it's another to read say, the Scott McKnight book and say, this guy's a jerk and he's a fool. And how did he get a job teaching the Bible? He's an idiot. He doesn't know any. Like, if you do that, you will fail that assignment, and I will consider that as inappropriate work, and that won't fly. Again, you don't have to agree with Scott McKnight. You don't have to agree with Justo Gonzalez. You don't have to agree with me, but you need to be respectful to everyone that you interact with, whether through their written work in the text that we read, or people that are personally related to class, like myself or fellow students. And I will, I'll hold you to that, right? So that's an important thing. Trying to think again. Okay, so maybe one quick comment about disabilities. I'm sure some of you, as is true in virtually every class I teach here, have some sort of accommodation needs related to perhaps learning differences that you have. Just contact me about those, right? I typically get an email from the Disability Service Office related to specific students, but really it's helpful if you will contact me as well. And let's just talk about your situation. I want you to succeed and thrive in this course, right? I want you to do well. But if I don't know what your situation is, it's very difficult for me to help you, right? But if you will kind of let me know, and let me know what success and thriving looks like for you, we'll figure out a way to make that happen in this course, and you'll do just fine. All right. So I think all of the texts have various ways that they can be accessed. Digitally, audio recordings of them and things like that. So there's a lot of ways to make all that work, but I just need you to communicate with me about that. Maybe one final word. I know I've kind of hinted at that a couple times, more than one final word here. I want to go back to an idea from the very beginning, right? So some of you, and I'm going to make a comment about this on Monday. Some of you are quite anxious about this class because you feel like you don't know anything and that you're starting really behind. There will be some basic things, that some students know that perhaps you don't know to begin with. My commitment to you is to create an environment where if you will just come to class, take notes, ask questions, and do the work, you will be fine. Every semester I've taught this class, I have had numerous students who got A's in this course who had never once read the Bible before. So please, please don't be anxious about that. Don't be fearful. And don't feel like you have to hide it. It's actually quite refreshing for me when somebody says, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm not really from a Christian background. This is all kind of new to me here at Fox, and I just hope this class goes well, but I'm pretty nervous. That really is helpful for me to know, because then I can kind of keep an eye out for you. And how are you doing? Are things making sense? Are there ways I can help you? So please, if you're on that end of the spectrum, communicate with me. Another group of students I'd like to comment about. Some of you are nervous about this class for an altogether different reason, right? Like some of you are nervous. Maybe you've been warned, like, hey, you're going off to this Christian college and you're going to have to take Bible classes from professors who will say they're Christians, but really what they want to do is attack and tear apart your faith and tear down your confidence in the Bible. And maybe you're coming to this class very much committed to your life as a Christian and are worried that somehow this class is going to threaten that. What I want to say to you is, we are going to ask questions. Like we are going to say, how does this text work? How did it come together? How did we get it? And what is it trying to do? And what is it meant to people for 3,000, 2,000 years? But I am a committed Christian. And the Bible has been one of the most transformative things in my life of faith, in my life as a person. I love the Bible. I love how God communicates to people through it. So if there are moments early on in the semester where you feel like, oh, all those warnings were correct, this guy is a heretic, like terrifying things are about to happen in this class, just breathe a little bit and hold on. Like, I don't think I've ever had a student reach midterm who still had that nervousness, who still had that concern about, is this course designed to attack my faith? I've probably had students after the first 2 or 3 class sessions that were pretty anxious still. But if you'll just kind of hang in there, right, and be open, like okay, I'm going to trust that Dr. Sherwood, or Steve, as most students call me, is a Christian and really wants to help me understand the Bible better. That things will be all right. That things will totally be all right. That doesn't mean you're going to always agree with everything I say. I'm almost certain that's the case. Like you shouldn't agree with everything any professor really, everything that any professor says. Um, but I think you will come away from the course saying, "Gosh, Steve really loves Scripture, and he wants me to love it too," and offered things that he hoped would help me in that regard. So if you're on either end, either the super nervous because you're unfamiliar, or you're very nervous because you feel I might attack or threaten kind of accepted understandings of what Scripture is to you, I think your concerns are going to be, you're going to find that they're unfounded. That as things go on, it's all going to be fine. But I've taught this class a lot of times, and enough times over the years, to know that there's a very good chance that there's some of each of that group in the room. And so I just want to address that before we even begin. Okay, well, I will see you in class, and we will get going on Monday.